Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Fairy Tales. I'm out of school now, but I'm really excited to continue this series of talks. And today we have a very special guest, Fred. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hey, Jay, thanks. I'm Fred Leichter. I am the founding director of the Hive at the Claremont Colleges, which is a center for collaborative creativity. I also have a faculty appointment at Harvey Mudd College and teach classes in human-centered design.
Awesome. Well, I think a lot of people, current students, know who you are, and they might know the fact that you were a student for a year back in the day. So, my 5C related question for you is what's the best thing that's changed?
In the spring of 1979, I was a junior at Swarthmore College in Pennsylvania, and I did an exchange semester and spent a semester here at Pomona, and I lived in Smiley Hall. When I was here, I was coming to Pomona College, and I knew the other schools were there and might have been to a party or two at Scripps or Claremont Men's College, as it was called at the time, but there wasn't really much connectivity, and I think there's much better connectivity now across the consortium. It's not all that it might be, but part of what we care about at the Hive is in our classes getting students together where there can be 5 students from 5 different colleges with 5 different majors working on a project together. So I think that's the strength of the consortium is improving, and the usefulness of that for students can be incredible.
Mhm, mhm. Okay, we have a lot to talk about, so we'll get right into it. Sort of starting with your background in design. I know you spent a lot of time at Fidelity. You were one of the early members of leadership within the design team. Could you just sort of briefly describe what you did?
Back to college, I was a math major at Swarthmore College. And when I graduated, I had 2 offers. One was to be a math teacher at a private high school, and one was to join a training program to become a programmer at Merrill Lynch on Wall Street. And I went with the programming job on Wall Street because it seemed more exciting and interesting to me. I wasn't ready to be a teacher. And so I worked at Merrill in New York for about 7 years and then got a job at a software company in Boston called Saddlebrook as a product manager, financial software. And then in 1990, I went to work for Fidelity Investments, also in Boston. So to put a little context around that, in 1990, and Fidelity Investments, which was already a leading financial services company in the retail financial services market, at that time there was no email in the company, no connected email, and so our email was a robot that traveled around on an electric stripe and delivered mail to departments, physical mail. But things were changing fast. In 1995, this thing called the World Wide Web had emerged, and companies like Fidelity were trying to figure out what to do with it. So I was part of a very small team that designed Fidelity's first website back in 1995, 96. And I started that out by sketching the idea of tabs onto that stack of manila folders. And that turned into Fidelity's website, which is, at least from an information architecture standpoint, remarkably similar almost 30 years later.
Yeah,
Anyway, then I developed design as a discipline at Fidelity, even though I hadn't really had any formal training in the field of design.
yeah. And maybe here you can sort of allude to our whole work of human-centered design, but why do you think it hasn't changed since you first designed it?
Well, and I don't want to say it hasn't changed. A lot of things have been added to it. A lot of things. I managed the team for about 13 years after we started it, and then I moved into the innovation group at Fidelity. But I think that 2 reasons: the architecture, the information architecture, meaning the way we present information to customers, hasn't changed. One is it's hard to change things. People get used to where things are. Your customers get used to them. You have millions, literally millions of users, and they get cranky if they can't find their statements or their financial. The other reason, which I also think is, I think we did a really good job. I think we were really human-centered about it and resisted the temptation to organize things the way the company was organized or by product sets like mutual funds and stocks. And so we organized it by accounts and trade, research, customer service, planning, some categories that made sense to customers. And so even early days before I had the language for it, we were doing the design in a human-centered fashion. It's always been an innovative company and dedicated to using technology to either make things more efficient or make things more accessible for their customers. And Fidelity was early days retail electronic brokerage and one of the earliest companies that created 401ks and made them very accessible for employees of all of the major companies. So what the web did for us, rather than replace all of the people who were answering phones, was make things more accessible. They already were, because you could dial an 800 number and talk to a phone rep. But we made it that you didn't need to dial the 800 number, talk to a phone rep, get a price of a quote or a mutual fund. You could go look it up yourself. But interestingly, when we started the website, Fidelity had about 3,000 people answering the phones. And when about 10 years later, when 95% of transactions were online, this is a quiz question I ask in my class that you would have taken. So I won't give you the quiz question, but so 95% of transactions went online. 10 years later, we had 6,000 phone reps. So how can that be? We had more phone reps. Two reasons for that. One is that we had 10 times as much business. The business had escalated dramatically, in large part because of the web. And the other reason is that we were not trying to get rid of phone reps, but people were able to have more interesting, longer conversations with their financial representatives now about whether they had enough money for retirement or whether they had a strategy to pay for their kids' college tuition. And so the conversations were less transactional, but the more interesting, forward-looking questions, you could still have a conversation with somebody. So it wasn't ever all about efficiency, but it was about efficiency where it mattered to the customer and therefore was beneficial for Fidelity also.
Yeah. Do you think you guys sort of knew that was going to happen?
Nobody knew that the web was going to do what it did. We were sort of guessing. I mean, some people thought back in 1995 when I was sketching those tabs onto manila folders that some people thought nobody would transact money over the internet. Well, that obviously turned out to be a thing that people do. And some people thought they would just look at it or it was a way of delivering statements and saving paper. So I don't think we knew it was going to be as much of a transformation as it turned out to be, but we were ready for it nonetheless. And we're investing pretty heavily in working on that and did that on a series of things, some of which panned out and some of which didn't. That's some of the stuff I got involved in later. Like we built, initially it was all web and people were on pretty antiquated computers. Some of them were even looking at stuff over dial-up lines, which was a thing, using services like America Online. And then the web became more prevalent using browsers like Netscape, a lot of which all doesn't exist. But then along the way, this thing called an iPhone came along. So we built an app for an iPhone and it turned out that was a big deal and it was necessary. And another thing came along called Google Glass. And so we built an app for Google Glass and that turned out to be a bust. But we weren't, you didn't always know. So
Yeah.
we were anticipating the things that people might use and getting ready to try to make it valuable for them with respect to their finances.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, all of your work there has obviously had a lot of impact and lasting impact. And then I kind of want to get into your transition into teaching. How did you get into that? And I also know you taught at Stanford, the D school, for a while. Well, and what was that experience like?
Yeah. Well, after having managed the design group at Fidelity for like 12, 13 years, I moved into the group called Fidelity Labs. It was an innovation group and trying to think about things like iPhones and other and Bitcoin and other things that might be transformational. But I then also got to know people at the Stanford D School that was just getting started in about 2005. And they had coined the phrase design thinking and were doing kind of what I had always been doing, but we're putting some language around it. And I really thought it was worthwhile. And I spent a bunch of time there, brought folks from Stanford to Fidelity to train people in our organization and for us to do design sprints using design thinking methods and had an opportunity Fidelity paid me in 2013 to spend a year at Stanford taking classes, teaching classes, and working on a project between Fidelity, Stanford D School, and the Stanford Center on Longevity, working on a project around intergenerational finance and what can be done to improve the communication within families about their finances. So that all led me to being at Stanford for some time, learning that I loved teaching design thinking, or what we call human-centered design here, and had a lot of insight that I could have even more leverage than I'd had by teaching other people to be innovators than just trying to be part of the team that was doing the innovation directly. But about 2 years later, I got a phone call one day that the Claremont colleges were starting a creativity program that was loosely defined as a D school for undergrads for the 5 Claremont colleges, and did I know anybody who would be interested in applying to be the managing director or the founding director? And I thought to myself, I think I might. I need to talk to my wife, but I think I might know somebody. And so, long story short, I knew where Claremont was because of that semester when I was in college. I threw my hat in the ring and was selected to be the founding director of what is officially known as the Rick and Susan Sontag Center for Collaborative Creativity, unofficially known as the HOT, where I've been now for 10 years. So,
Yeah.
and as part of that, I was given an appointment as a clinical professor of engineering at Harvey Mudd College so that I could teach human centered design, advanced human centered design, and also advise students on some of their thesis work.
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome. Well, we'll get into the hive in a little bit, but first I really want to talk about the human-centered design part, the teaching part. I always say when asked what my favorite class was, it was human-centered design with you and the advanced with Asha. It's definitely had a big impact on me, and I know it has a lot of impact on others as well. What sort of like what do you think is like a main message or takeaway or like philosophy behind humans?
Well, if you don't mind, I'll put it back on you for a second. What made human centered design and advanced human centered design so valuable for you, and what was the main thing that you like call upon now, especially as a recent graduate?
Okay, okay. Well, there's a few parts, and I'll try to structure it. I've always been interested in problem solving, but I haven't had like structure around it. It's just like go see a problem and try to solve it. But what human centered design gave me was a way of thinking that instead of trying to look for the solution, really focusing on the problem first and focusing on a very like human centric way with empathy and listening and looking at assumptions, things like that. So for me, it really felt like a realistic and very empathetic way of finding problems and then attempting to solve them. And I think looking back now, there's a lot of connections to human-centered design and startups and the world of entrepreneurship, which I'm interested in. So yeah, that's probably why.
Yeah, well, good answer. You must have had a good instructor. No, so I'd say pretty much the same thing. What's exciting to me about human centered design is seeing light bulbs go off for students with this phrase that you just said that we say a lot: fall in love with the problem, not the solution. We tend to like fall in love with the solution. Like that's the thing. We got the answer and that's our startup and it's going to make a lot of money and we'll create a great pitch deck and VCs will throw money at us. But really we should be spending more time wrestling with the problem and thinking to ourselves, I wonder if there's another way to solve this problem. I wonder if I fully understand it. I wonder if I can create something that's just a rough prototype that will help validate my assumptions and help make me right. So what human-centered design does is as you said, it starts with empathy. It starts with like trying to deeply observe and understand a person or a type of person. And before you start figuring out what's the total addressable market or any of these things, but to like really get a deep problem and then come up with as many ways as you can think of, form a clear point of view about what that need is that wasn't obvious without the research, right? It isn't the thing that everybody else is already trying to do. And then to come up with a lot of ideas and start trying some of them out before you think you're ready. The
Yeah.
other thing that human centered design does, even for people who consider themselves risk takers, is to unlock the idea that you have to be perfect and to accept that failure is part of being successful. And especially as an entrepreneur, you have to try things that don't work. And if you try to get it right the first time, you're cutting yourself short from what the quality of the impact can be. If you move quickly, but expect to be wrong before you're right and try to be evidence based and try to really test things.
Yeah.
We also teach a lot of methods that are I don't know, they're like party tricks almost, of how to generate ideas and how to generate lots of ideas and how to connect things that maybe other people don't see as connected. And to help people who don't necessarily consider themselves to be creative to learn. There are methods. Anybody can learn to be creative. There are methods to do it. And if you get people with different perspectives, different backgrounds, different skills together, they'll do even better at generating a good diversity of ideas that will then have more probability of turning into something worthwhile.
Yeah. That's a good point. That's another part I loved about HCD. It was working with like different kinds of people. Yeah. I need to start integrating that into my answer.
Yeah, because when I can get, and we do it you were a TA also, so you were obviously a great student. That's why we selected you to be a teaching assistant. But you know that when we put teams together, as best we could, we tried to put like if I always try to get at least one team where there are five students from five different colleges with five different majors
Yeah.
working on a real world ambiguous problem. And that's such a great learning opportunity because in the real world, the quote unquote real world, that's where you'll end up in most organizations. You can't, you may be able to start something with like three engineers or computer scientists all working on it, but you're going to come up with a coding solution. And if you get three economists, you'll come up with an economic solution. But if you get a diversity of perspectives, then you're much more likely to come up with something interesting, worthwhile, and sustainable.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then you also learn like different languages. You learn how to talk to an engineer, or how to talk to a lawyer, or how to talk to a marketing person. And most importantly, how to talk to a customer or a human.
Yeah, 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 that's awesome. And sometimes you become really close friends with them. I don't know if you remember, but Isaac, who was in my group that you assigned like 2 years ago now, I've met with him quite a few times, even though he's graduated. And we're going to be working, playing soccer together, San
Oh, that's
Francisco.
awesome. I kind of knew you were friends, but I didn't know that's where it started. So that's awesome. And
Yeah, yeah,
he was at the Bay Area meetup also.
right,
You were
exactly.
even though he was graduated and you were yet to graduate. So
Yeah,
yes, I've seen that happen that people do. Like they form pretty, you work on a thing together and you try, you maybe fail, you maybe laugh, but you bond over it as
yeah,
well.
yeah, yeah. One thing I want to ask you about, well, at the end of the day, this is a sort of entrepreneurship related interview series. I can see the connection between this and this as in human-centered design and entrepreneurship. But I think in today's world where everything's so fast and like AI is making all these possibilities, I wanted to ask, I guess, how do we ensure that people, founders, entrepreneurs approach problems with empathy in mind, with the end users in mind, and not just like go, go, go and try to just put products out there?
Yeah, great question. I think it creates all kinds of opportunities to do things faster, quicker, cheaper than before, especially around like execution or coding or visual mockups. What AI doesn't do, and I can't imagine it doing it really, is deeply understand other people and imagine things that are possible that are
Mm,
not just a derivative of what already exists. And so, you know, that's what I say a lot. Like you can actually practice an interview with AI or have AI interview you, but you can't. AI can't really tell when somebody's saying one thing and they're meaning another or
yeah,
it can't really tell when somebody is being vulnerable about a need that they have in a truly human way. So I think having a human centered approach and then having an understanding of what AI can do to help you implement something is a magic combination. But you can't just think that. So having human centered instincts and design and ability to really notice people is what is going to allow people who are fluent in AI or have somebody on their team who's fluent in AI to move not just fast, but fast in a purposeful direction. Like
mm,
just getting somewhere fast doesn't really necessarily do you any good, but
yeah,
uncovering a true need and then finding a way to meet that need quickly can be really powerful. If you want to create some prototypes, well, you might use AI or you know to help code something up or help create a mock-up of an interface so you can quickly demonstrate what you're doing. You also still might draw it out by hand because sometimes the hand-drawn things get more sincere feedback. I also has the flaw that it's become pretty good at telling you what you want to hear rather than giving you interesting feedback, right? It's sort of like parrot stuff back
yeah,
and an entrepreneur doesn't succeed by like having everybody tell them how good they are, how smart they are. So you gotta have some ways of figuring out what's your biggest risk to your venture and how am I going to figure that out? And that takes human insight.
yeah, yeah. I love that. Yeah. Is there anything else you want to add? I honestly, I could talk about HCD for a really long time, but just for the sake of time.
Is yes, HCD is a tremendous tool for somebody who wants to be an entrepreneur. It's also a tremendous tool for someone who wants to be more of an intrapreneur. That's basically what I did at Fidelity. I was working in a large organization. And I think it's also a tool, like you don't have to have a job necessarily that has the title design something, design researcher. But some of the alums that have come through our class that have been most successful or very successful in our own way are working in industries where design hasn't really been there in the past. I'm thinking specifically of healthcare and law and even education. But so if you think about, most people think about experiences with their healthcare provider or their doctor. They don't have a lot of great things to say about it.
Yeah.
So bringing human-centered design methods into that work can really matter. That's like Caitlin Paulson, who was a Harvey Mudd alum, double major in engineering and human-centered design, is now working as a healthcare design strategist and doing some great work. So I don't think you
Yeah.
have to just be like, oh, I got to do a startup. I think you can look
Yeah.
at industries that have room to grow in the way they work with and respect their customers.
Yeah. I would love one for like airports.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
PSA. And
Yeah.
I've done work with like JetBlue Airlines in the past, and they do try and they create some better experiences, but they're living in a really constrained system. And
Mm.
so when I was at Fidelity, we worked with JetBlue to understand, oh, what do you do in a highly regulated, very secure environment, and what can you learn? What insights can you get about communication?
Yeah. 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 And you mentioned healthcare there, and this will be the last bit, but
Yeah.
the example that always comes to me when it comes to like the impact of HCD is that the example you brought up in class of the Stanford Hospital and the anesthesia rate of children,
Yeah.
MRI machines. It was like 60%, but by simply just talking to the users and changing the layout of the room, it went down to like what, 10% or something like that. It's
Yeah,
great.
it's just a
Yeah.
story about Doug Dietz at GE Healthcare, but I knew him through Stanford. Yeah, the anesthesia rate for children who were needing to have an MRI examination went from 60% to 2%
Oh,
when they changed the graphics, painted the machines, created a playful, interesting environment, and thought about the anxiety that the child was experiencing in this big noisy machine. So it just was like a brilliant way of thinking of a better way than anesthesia to help a child to relax and even enjoy the experience.
all the current students probably know about what the Hive is or have at least been in it. I would encourage them to take a class. But for the people that maybe was at the Claremont colleges before the Hive was a thing, do you have any sort of, we talked about what the Hive was, but do you have any sort of message for them or any ways that they might want to get involved or anything like that?
Well, we think of the Hive as sort of three levels of engagement. One is that anybody can come into the Hive from any of the colleges, faculty, student, staff, and also community members. And there are lots of materials that are available for free to make things: cards, posters, buttons, T-shirts. And the second level of engagement is there are workshops, and those range from like creative skills like podcasting, sound recording, woodworking, to things like making a business plan or creating a point of view or empathetic listening. So a lot of building blocks. And then the third level of engagement is the classes and that we teach here. And also we open up our spaces. We have a unique kind of approach to our space in that everything is flexible. So you walk into the human-centered design class and the tables roll on wheels, and I set the room up differently every single class with some intention. So you're never just sitting in like a typical classroom where you have your comfort zone where it might be the third seat from the left in the fourth row. And
Yeah.
that's where you sit because we mix it up. And so that creates more liveliness in the class, more connectivity. People get to know more of the other students, like people like you and Isaac. It enhances their potential to get to know each other and be friends. So I think that learning environment also a super important element that we have designed. And more, it's all headed towards creating impact and not just being creative for the sake of making something beautiful, but being creative for the sake of being able to make a change in the world. This is a phrase that comes from David Kelly, the creative confidence to believe you can do that kind of thing. And like the different entry points, some people don't really know about the Hive and they sign up for this class. Some people come here because they're interested in podcasting or screen printing, and then they learn about the classes. More and more, we're trying to make connection between the making spaces and the academic programs. But a lot of faculty will come and teach here. Like Albert Park, who's a history professor at
Right.
CMC, teaches his classes here, his history classes, because he likes to have the opportunity for students to make representations of the cultures and the histories they're studying.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. And it's a very cozy spot too. Just
Yeah,
real.
you'll see a lot of signs around the Hive that say, yes, you can, definitely something like, yes, you can move things around. Yes, you can hang out here. Yes, you can take a
Yeah.
nap. Yes, and we have comfortable furniture and invite people to linger, relax, have a space that feels safe from whatever campus or whatever identity group they come from, and to like breathe and then make things.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's honestly everything I had. Do you have anything as a final word?
Well, first of all, thanks, Jay. Please stay in touch. I love that you're doing this podcast. I want to hear this and the other episodes. Don't be a stranger.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'd love to have you come. Another thing, I'll say one more thing. It's about the Hive, but some of the most valuable things we do are create connection between alumni and current students. And the current students always love to hear from alums, especially fairly recent alums who may have taken some of the same classes and landed in a different place. So we did we mentioned earlier, a Bay Area meetup for human centered design students last year. So I'd love to, maybe you can host the next one. I'd love to
Ooh.
um, keep doing that kind of thing.
Yeah, it was a real pleasure. And the 10-year reunion at the Hive also recently, that was a great blast. Yeah. So, I mean, I'll definitely figure out ways to stay
Yeah, the
involved.
highlight of the 10-year reunion also was the stories from both alum and alumni, faculty, and some current students about
Yeah.
what they have gotten from the Hive and where they're taking it. And it was such a rich combination of things
Yeah.
and tapestry of different people that was really rewarding to see. I mean, the other thing I should mention is I'm stepping down as the director of the Hive after 10 years, but continuing to teach my class. And there's somebody named Abby Don who's stepping in, who's a you met because I invited her along. She was a Pomona alum, an early Apple employee, worked at IDEO and a bunch of other firms that really built design into what they do. So a lot of us has a similar background to mine. And she's coming in to take the reins of the administrative part of the
Yeah.
program and the awareness that we create among all the faculty here, and
Yeah.
get to continue to do the most joyful part, which is working with students like you and
Yeah.
opening their eyes to being human centered.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm glad you're staying involved. I think that's the most important part. Yeah. Well, thanks, Fred. Yeah.
Thank you, Jay. Like I said, stay in touch. I can't wait to hear this. And thanks for doing it.
Yeah. Awesome.